everyone, this is Tony Holbein from Growblocks. You are listening to the Revenue Formula with Mikkel and Tony. In today's episode, we share 3 reasons sales isn't making quota, all from very real cases. Enjoy.
So actually, since we started doing video on Spotify, I've noticed a thing. Whenever I wear this shirt, so I'm wearing a black tee, I'm just a floating head. You can literally not see anything but, 1 or 2 pale arms and then my head.
Is it a good thing? I think it's a good thing.
I don't know.
I think everyone benefits.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should have a green shirt and we could do some green screen stuff on there instead. That would be pretty funny.
So fun.
But actually, so this weekend, it's my one of my younger sister's birthday. And invited everyone over. They'd set up pavilions on the patio. And we're outside. And the weather was like, I don't know if you recall the weather yesterday. It was very mixed.
It's like hardcore sunshine, hardcore rain.
Yeah, that was
like there was nothing.
The pendulum was swinging back and forth every hour. And we were sitting there and it was pretty hot. And then all of a sudden, I think it took about 5 minutes. The clouds, they just rushed in. And then the skies just opened up and emptied water everywhere. Yeah. And I sat with my 2 girls on my lap. And I was like, we need to get inside now. Hand one off to my dad, take the youngest. And you know what can happen with the pavilion, right?
They can take off. It's a kite.
Well, that can happen.
It's a kite.
But that's not what happened, though. But basically, a lot of water accumulated on top of it. And I was like, I had to go just outside and around the table. And the second I do that, all the water just ejects. And what happens is it hits my daughter right in the face. And I go like scot-free. Not a drop of water on me. And I could just see her in the face, like when you get a bucket of water in your face and you're not prepared for it. She was just like, what happened?
But also you saw the water coming and you just held up your child to block it.
Yeah,
no,
that's actually
really what you did.
That's
really what you did.
And you know what? That's funny because segue-wise, that's exactly what's happening. A lot of folks, they're missing quota and they're not prepared for it. And what happens? Someone pulls up the VP sales to shield themselves from blame. That's literally what happened. So this is like finally the segue game is back.
Yeah.
We're back in business.
Is it back?
We also
just because you kind of changed some words together that
that's
kind
true.
of fit.
And it was so funny. I was thinking, finally, we're going to record on Monday again. We've been a bit off our game. We can finally get that rhythm up and running again. What are you doing next Monday?
Oh, I'm not here.
Yeah, you're on holiday. So it's like, good thing we started up again.
But also, the good thing is that, it's Monday morning. No one talked to each other.
Yeah, obviously.
And so we kind of got it all reserved for now.
No, exactly. That's what it is. So, no, but the thing is, you and I have talked a bit as of late about all the wonderful sales reps. I hold a great respect for that work. It's ruthless, super practical. Yeah, also to me.
Do you?
No, I do. Honestly, I do. I could never do that job. It's, one moment you think you have it, and then boop, deal gone. I could not deal with that kind of pressure. But we've talked a lot about external changes happening, right? Everyone who's listened to probably the last 10 episodes we've aired have heard some of the challenges out there about quota completion, win rates, ACV, sales cycle length. Everything is basically shit. Right? But actually, we've noticed a pattern. It's no secret. We talk with a lot of customers and a lot of folks out there in the space. And we've kind of noticed a pattern of things that they can change. That's hopefully going to help out.
Yep. So and just to make this a little bit more real. So this is literally, those are 2 to 3 examples. And we've changed some stuff and so forth. But it's literally kind of out of the, I think, 10 last customers we saw on, this has been the case with 5 other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is not just like Tony found something on LinkedIn, or Mikkel rather found something on LinkedIn. Let's talk about that again. No, this is like absolutely real. The numbers obviously changed, kind of some of the details are changed, but ultimately this is really what people still are experiencing out there.
Yeah.
And you might be thinking, we're super sophisticated, meaning kind of you listener and the team super sophisticated. But I'm telling you, out of the people that are listening to us, probably 50 to 40% are still having this issue. So chances are, if you and your colleague are listening to this, your company's having
you're going to find something to fix. And I think that's the beautiful thing. Now it's not like, it's out of our hands. We can't, people are including finance and we don't know how to deal with, there's so many things that, you can't really do anything about. That's just a fact of life now. Here, you're going to get 3 very real examples of things that you can actually go and change that is going to have an impact for the better.
That's it.
So we have like 3 problems and 3 solutions. Let's hop into the first.
So this is a company and they have been pacing behind their revenue expectations. No surprise there, right? Okay, kind of that happens all the time.
Is that different from revenue ambitions, or is that the same?
Yeah. I mean, they're basically kind of behind target, right? And rolling is out. We, as part of the rollout, kind of do a little bit of an initial, go-to-market diagnostic. You'd say kind of very light, not like a winning by design, something like this, but very light to also teach, how to use the tool and so forth. And obviously, kind of we're seeing that they're kind of pacing behind what they actually wanted to achieve, and then we're trying to figure out, in the funnel, what's wrong, and basically. The surprise was on the inbound side. The surprise was they're creating a lot of MQLs. They're hitting those targets really nicely, right? And we're talking about MQLs in the thousands while they're closing deals in the tens.
Yeah.
And low tens there.
Yeah.
That being that. Yeah. So you can already feel ashamed here, Mikkel.
Yeah.
Because you're marketing basically.
It's my fault.
It's your fault.
Yeah.
And what came out of that is like, well, and this is all just so real. Like, yes, we're hitting our inbound targets. Well, but what are you guys talking about? Kind of sales just can't convert this shit. But it's sales fault. And then we unfold this thing a little bit. And then we're seeing that out of the thousands of MQLs, the vast majority is webinars, white paper downloads, maybe lists that were bought, events, and so forth, right? And we're talking like 5% demo requests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And when you only look at the demo request line, you actually see that by itself was actually pacing to target.
Yeah.
I think they were a little bit behind in terms of volume, so they should have had a little bit, more there. But basically, kind of the line by itself was pacing to target perfectly.
Yeah.
Lots of opportunities coming out, lots of revenue coming out. All of that is absolutely great. But just obviously the other stuff, in the thousands of leads, not going anywhere. Yeah. And we talked about the split funnel analysis a couple of times, right? But I also want to today kind of explore this from the salesperson's perspective.
Yeah.
So maybe you're a VP sales listening, maybe you're a very sales-driven CRO listening, and you're dealing with the same issue, right? Kind of you're getting a bunch of leads. They're all kind of good. They're all, you're hitting the quality threshold, but your team is just not able to convert them into money. And I think, to be really honest, if you're not a RevOps that's in the weeds, or if you're not the marketing guy that kind of knows but kind of silent about it, which, as you know,
target
Mikkel,
is hit.
The target is achieved, check mark. I think a VP sales is kind of getting screwed here, right? Because it's extremely difficult from a VP sales perspective to understand, what are the different basically leads in this case, right? We're going to talk about some other areas. Leads in this case actually coming my way, and what's the quality of those, right? You might anecdotally hear from a sales rep like, hey, this was like a, Facebook lead and they didn't go anywhere, or this was, hey, I'm trying to talk to this person and download this webinar, watch the webinar. He doesn't give a damn about what we're doing here.
Yeah.
You might hear this anecdotally, but it's extremely difficult from a VP sales perspective to scrutinize the funnel on top of him, right, or her. And this is kind of what's happening here, right? So in this case, VP sales gets squeezed, kind of, why aren't you hitting target? And in reality, the sales reps are actually doing a good job. Like if you kind of run the numbers historically, what they should be getting out of the demos, what they should getting out of the other stuff, that actually kind of matched up. Kind of this was as expected, but because the mix shifted behind the scenes, VP sales didn't see it. Anecdotally kind of had a hunch and stuff, but couldn't prove it, right?
Yeah.
Basically impossible for him and then also subsequently the company to hit target because of it.
Yeah. What always confounded me in this stuff is we were able to book meetings on the back of SDRs and close them cold. But then you have someone who just have an inkling of who you are, whether it's that kind of, hey, just because I downloaded doesn't give you the right, so now I'm not even gonna like. I just wonder what is happening.
So
there.
basically, why are webinar leads worse than outbound?
Exactly.
Right? So I think the very simple reason is that with outbound, you can at least target.
True. Yeah.
Webinar, you get like anyone and everyone. And sure, you can kind of sort some of them away. But ultimately, we know that the shape of the market is you will have more smaller than bigger companies.
Yeah.
And then ultimately what comes through the pipeline there in terms of webinar leads that know you, you will have more rubbish that you wouldn't actually outbound to.
Yeah.
Right? And then they're thinking is, well, because they know us, maybe then we should be outbounding to them. Kind of that's the marketing kind of idea. And that turns out to be false.
Yeah.
I would even say, and I've actually done this and it worked, if you give the inbound SDR, because you essentially need an inbound SDR to kind of work through those webinars. Actually, you need an outbound SDR because it's really an outbound job. But anyway, you need some kind of a human helping you work through this.
Yeah.
If you're still running this playbook, right? If you're still running this playbook, some people have moved away from this. Make that person, make that SDR report to marketing. Make him or her be part of the marketing budget. And what you will find very quickly is that the CMO goes like, you know what, actually, I think I want to use the money differently. And so this is one of those tests you can run there, right?
So, and I also think what you really got to look at here, and this is, whether you sit in marketing or sales doesn't really matter. You need to look at where are they coming from and how did they convert, right? So that's back to the low intent, high intent. You really want to understand that stuff because this is a classic case where you're just getting a lot of low intent leads. And it is not going to go anywhere, right?
The thing is, and I had this was more of a sales call recently, actually. Very large company. We're talking 150 million. And the person I talked to basically kind of was faced with, in the Excel spreadsheet, marketing was hitting again and again and again and again and again.
And sales was missing again and again. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we talked about this, we figured out it's probably this issue here.
Yeah.
Right? It's just so clear. And I literally asked him, I mean, this was a bit of a discovery prospecting call and we were kind of thinking about, Growblocks there. But I basically asked him like, hey, if a kid could give you full visibility into what the quality of stuff is that's coming your way, do you think this would extend your tenure at the company? And he was like, yes, totally. Yes, it does. So and that's what I'm saying, kind of so many people are faced with this stuff. And now we're only talking about, kinds of MQLs in terms of like hand raisers or not hand raisers.
Yeah.
You have the same thing happening though with, referrals might come your way, which have a different, way of converting. You might, some teams are being hit with processing upsell opportunities, right? They convert extremely differently. And there's so much stuff happening on the top end on the funnel. We're going to talk about some of the outbound pieces in a second. There's so much stuff happening there where, yes, while you're hitting the overall quantity number, the makeup of these that sit behind them is usually so vastly different, and it's basically impossible for the VP of sales to know.
I also just want to point out that on the surface, this seems like an easy fix, right? But it will actually require a bit of work internally. First, you need to shift people around away from a mindset that's broken, which is inherently in marketing, right? We're generating a lot of leads. It doesn't create any deals. That's a problem, right? But you have a lot of folks who will be hesitant to shift around, so you need to navigate that. On the other side of the spectrum, you then need to figure out where do you reallocate resources. And if let's just say all the budget stays in marketing, it's going to take a while until you start seeing the fruits of that labor and shifting around. There will need to be experimentation and da. So it is a lot of work.
I totally agree. The VP sales in the process just shouldn't get fired all the time.
No, exactly. Yeah. No, I agree. And I think this also speaks for me a bit to the sales marketing alignment, because if you can have a VP marketing pop the champagne, we hit target, and then the company misses on revenue, something is just really broken as well.
No, and the way kind of I'm starting to think about this. So in one of the companies I worked at, we basically created a graph that had, the expected revenue outcome per rep based on the opportunities that he or she received.
Yeah.
Right? So, okay, lots of words. What does this mean? Well, if you have a 250K target, let's just say you do, per AE, and some AEs are hitting, some AEs are not hitting. Kind of the first thing is like, well, why is that happening, right? And one of the things you might be looking into is, well, some reps got 100 opportunities in a quarter and others got like 20.
Yeah.
So actually, the 250K target kind of is irrelevant actually for that, right? You actually want to know, did they convert those 10 or 50 in the best possible way or the 100 in the best possible way. Celebrating the guy that converts 100 to hit 250K, probably not worth celebrating, actually, right? So there's a little bit of like, yes, actually people need to be judged by their throughput, and that is limited and constrained or enabled by the input.
Yeah.
Right? You need to take those two things into consideration, right? And the same way you can actually think also about the sales profession in general, everything that's sometimes we're starting to refer to them the modern VP of sales. Basically, well, yes, whatever is coming your way, you are responsible for the throughput of that from interest to then actually closed won.
Yeah.
But you need to have an understanding how the quality stacks up of the stuff that's coming your way to judge actually the throughput.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And based on, modeling and all of that kind of crazy stuff that we're doing, you can then actually say like, well, this is what we could have expected to achieve versus this is what we actually were able to achieve.
Yeah.
And some of that might still be the sales leader's fault, by the way. Some conversion rate might still be lower than it was expected to be, but at least you have a little bit of like, hey, this was actually a marketing problem. This was a sales problem.
I think it's also, you can ultimately just break it down. The worst thing you can go and do now is go to the VP market and say, hey, change all this stuff. I just need more inbounds. It's like very unhelpful request because everyone wants that, right? But if you can break it down to say, hey, in these market, I need this amount of meetings from these types of prospects, then all of a sudden there's something to work with.
Yeah.
Let's go to problem number 2.
So similar, also top funnel. And again, this is like an actual story. Basically, outbound team. Yeah, fairly successful.
Yeah.
Like you look at the numbers, they're hitting 10, 12 meetings a month per SDR.
In this environment.
In this environment, in the US, right? It's going in the exact right direction. And you think like, well, why is that stuff not converting? Like that's so weird. And what we looked at, all the closed won deals, where they're coming from, well, the US. Where we're over 50% of the bookings from the SDRs happening outside of the US.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, so this is, some people are thinking like, oh, wow, this is such an amateur thing that would never happen to us.
Yeah.
You would be surprised.
Yeah.
Honestly, you would be surprised. And, I think as a VP of sales, thinking, or the CRO that is responsible for this, number one, RevOps listening here, right? You guys need to, guys and girls, you need to catch that.
Yeah.
That's like a thing.
Yeah,
You just need to know about this. But also, those are things that your sales reps can actually tell you.
Yeah.
Like, just have a conversation with your AEs and say, like, well, this outbound thing isn't working. Someone will tell you, well, half of them are like from somewhere where we can't close any business.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a reason.
Yeah.
So, those kind of things. And sometimes this, you can go super complicated and try and get there by all kinds of analysis and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's usually much simpler than that.
Yeah.
Usually some of that stuff already existed. And then, while you might have a hunch, then putting these things side by side, US versus non-US,
Yeah.
and see how many opportunities were generated, how many then converted, how many actually end up being revenue. You start seeing it's extremely crystal clear. And then the question then there is like, well, should we maybe stop that?
Yeah.
And if we were to stop that, will these SDRs actually be able to book the same amount of meetings in the US? And maybe not.
Yeah.
And then maybe you need to look at your targets and so forth. Maybe you need to have a look. But right now, 50% of the stuff coming out of the team is basically useless. You're still paying commissions against that. And they're basically keeping the A team busy with stuff that cannot actually convert.
Yeah.
Right. So there's just something that's just so crystal clear. Just look at that stuff.
Yeah.
And then move these things around. And again, right, either you're like, VP sales, CRO persona focusing predominantly on the sales piece, which I think is, you might have other areas, but this will be your main focus many times. It might be really difficult to suss out what's coming from, now we're just adding outbound to it.
Yeah.
Right? What's coming top funnel and what are the flaws with that?
Yeah.
Because it looks on a piece of paper, it looks like the SDRs are actually performing extremely well. Good stuff is coming out of that.
Yeah.
You look at it blended and say like, actually their conversion rate is only 5 to 6%. So, maybe it's not, we need to tweak it a little bit. But actually, once you have someone unfold this and be like, no, actually I have 15% conversion rate in the US and 0 everywhere else. It's like, oh, wait a minute. That feels like we could have known this.
Yeah. It's so funny. Whenever I read something around go-to-market strategy. One of the first things that I always like scoffed at and went like, yeah, this is so obvious. Like, you need to define your ICP.
Yeah.
You need to define, and it's so silly. Like, so we had, what was his name? Price Intelligently? Harrison Rose. We had Harrison Rose on the show. And he talked a bit about
Paddle.
Yeah, from Paddle.
They
Sorry,
bought the Price
my
Intelligence
bad.
guys. Yeah.
From Paddle, and he basically talking about, well, they did inbound and they did outbound. Their ICP was basically just, here's the target list of companies we want as customers. Go hit the same, right? And in this case, it would be, yeah, they're all going to be in the States. They're all going to be, whatever company X, B, C, D, E, F, G. And I think that's ultimately also where you want to end up at in order to book the right meetings, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying, all of this sounds so super obvious and straightforward. What we've learned is, while this is easy in theory, when Mikkel and Tony are talking about this, obviously kind of boring, skip. But in reality, kind of, it happens so often.
Yeah, but it's also like, how often are you going to sit and look at that kind of split analysis by market? It's like, you're rarely going to do that, actually.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and this is, I think, where people should just challenge their sales ops RevOps team.
Yeah.
And those are things that they just have to catch.
Yeah.
And yes, there needs to be a little bit of, well, why is this happening? There needs to be a bit of like, just look in that corner over there.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I mean, this is, in another episode, we probably would have called this, funnel leakage.
Yeah.
This is like extremely inefficient. You could probably be growing 50% faster if you spotted this.
And it's not just funnel leakage, it's also just wasted resources, right? If you kind of said, hey, half the meetings are coming from outside US, it basically means you could cut half the SDR team. Just, think about that for a second, what would happen. And the other side of the coin is if you are, like many of our listeners, a scale up and need to grow, it means that team has to grow. And if you scale it on a foundation of booking the wrong meetings, those problems, they're going to compound, right? And that's just unsustainable over time.
So then the last thing, and this was a team, as we set this up, they were like very worried about their sales team's performance and efficiency, basically. And I'm talking really account executives here, right?
Closers.
And the closers and closing and, all of that. Big issue. And basically, kind of for that customer, we split it out, based on conversations with them, right? Kind of, and how they actually see the world. So it's like we didn't add, I mean, maybe a little bit of consultancy thing we added on top, but kind of very little. We just split it out. I think inbound, outbound, upsell, referrals, and self-prospecting.
Yeah,
like the usual ones. And so basically, kind of, we were able to, and in this case, kind of zero in on the account executive team. And what we basically were seeing is that they weren't closing much from the inbound, outbound stuff. Referral upsell was obviously easy. And actually, they closed a bunch from the self-prospector piece.
Yeah.
Right? And you look at this and it's like, well, that's kind of weird. How does that work? Obviously, no one hit target. Like, obviously.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of, if you basically 60-70% of your volume is coming from inbound, outbound, and it's not converting at all, you cannot hit your target, right? But then they're self-prospected on top of that, and keep in mind, they have an SDR team, and then, and actually they, because they obviously had, time in their hands or something like this, the stuff that they were self-prospecting was closing extremely nicely. And, you can dig into this, probably was old closed lost opportunities and, some other stuff and like, stuff that they build up in referrals. And that's great. That's how an AE team should be working, right? But really only looking at the actual opportunities that they receive that, were working out in general, you could see that conversion rate was extremely high, was 20-25% or something like this. And on the inbound and outbound stuff, there was a mix, and this is a different customer, but a mix of the issues that we just previously discussed. Lots of MQLs that are not converting, outbounds happening very efficiently, but in a completely wrong, space or area or whatever it was, right? Kind of that the stuff was just not working out. So these AEs did what they could in order to find as many opportunities as possible and actually converted them extremely well, right? And kind of our analysis, when we looked, and again, right, this is not us sitting there being winning by design and doing all kinds of consultancy analysis, but we just looked at the numbers and it's like, actually, AEs are actually pretty good. I don't think you need to let them go. I don't think you need to fire them at all, actually. I think you should figure out how you can get them more valuable outbound and inbound opportunities.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, right? And that was like a massive aha moment, obviously, for the other side, because they were just basically about to make a massive mistake. Right?
Yeah.
And I see this, and we were joking about this. Well, the VP of sales shouldn't get fired for this, but this is what happens again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
You know, folks are firing the wrong folks.
Yeah. That's basically, yeah.
You know, and that's obviously a shame, but you kind of get, you know, messed up pretty badly, right? Because you're kind of pushing someone out that actually didn't mess up. You can still do that, you know, fine. But then you kind of get someone else in that may or may not work out, because, you know, switching out a leader is always
Yeah.
risky. The organ might be rejected.
Yeah.
You know, the organ transplant. So that might not work out. So you kind of lose another 6 months there. But the worst thing is actually, you're actually not addressing the root cause issue. You're actually not fixing anything. You're just slowing everything even further down. And then the root cause issue will remain in place. And then if you're lucky and that new leader turns out to be good and you actually want to stick with her or him, she or he will get fired anyway in 12 months again.
The same problem is still there.
Problem is still there. And kind of the amount of money that is just burned, the amount of value that's wasted, it's just insane for like super easy fixes and simple improvements, right?
But it's also funny with this case. It just got me thinking, like, marketing obsessed about getting leads over to sales. SDRs obsessed about getting meetings to AEs. AEs, money. They're obsessed about money. That's why the self prospecting in this case, they might have a different feel, and it's just there is probably something around the, hey, what are we working towards here as a collective go-to-market team?
And again, I think it is okay not to pay SDRs necessarily on
for
closed
sure
money, right? So, and it's the same with marketing, but it's just, I mean, this is almost a little bit of the Growblocks pitch again. It's like just having that visibility, just clearly kind of, you know what, actually marketing your demo request, fantastic. Want to have more of those. That kind of, it translates through super efficiently. Whatever we pay for Google and LinkedIn to kind of get those, easiest money we ever paid. All the money you're investing with the team, with ads, with SDRs working those useless leads on the other stuff. Let's think about that. Let's kind of move this around maybe. And I'm not saying kind of shut it down or something like that, but actually kind of look at this in a different way, right? And that kind of, I want to say, analysis, I don't think you need to do this often. I don't think it's like an everyday kind of thing.
No.
But you want to do it, at least once a year, period. For your planning, you want to have that at least once a year. But I actually also think you want to have it at least once a month, without software, because you want to understand, why did we miss? And by the way, everyone you talk to, like, people miss all the time. So why is it that we actually missed? And then, one of the reasons might be, well, the staff from marketing or the outbounds or whatever actually didn't behave like we thought it would behave. And that's what caused a large pain. Let's just say you missed by 250K, whatever the number, 250K. And it actually could be that the VP of sales is getting fired because it's the third time in a row. Kind of missing, with a big difference here. But if you were to unfold it, you would actually see that 200K of that problem was created top funnel. And maybe you even hit all the volume steps, all the, high five on MQLs, high fives on meetings booked. Maybe hit all of that, but the way they were generated and all of that behind the quality basically kind of shifted in a way that, the system, the model would actually say like, well, you actually created 200K less in value here. And now you, dear sales, need to make that up. And yes, maybe the sales team also messed up, creating another issue in terms of ACVs, giving too much discount, was desperate or something like this, which then resulted in another 50K loss, right? And both things together is the minus 250K. But only the VP sales is getting fired for it.
Tough luck.
Tough luck, man.
So those were 3 very real cases that we see again and again.
Yes.
And hopefully, you're able to spot this and fix it and help sales make quota again, because it's going to help the business out. And it is one of those things that you have control over, which I think is super powerful. Just, take back some control and responsibility over your ability to grow.
Yes.
Super critical.
But also, we sometimes call them the enlightened or the modern VP of sales.
Yeah.
I think they're the ones that are a bit more data literate, that actually kind of need to use that stuff to, not only make sure they don't get fired, but also help the company to make better decisions, because that's actually what this is.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mikkel, everyone else, thank you so much. If you like this, follow, like, subscribe, hit the bell, wherever you're listening on this, and maybe forward this to your RevOps or VP sales.
Could also be VP marketing.
Could be.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.